friends, I'm Fathom and I host the show Vinyl Friday.
Hi, I'm Abigail DeVoe. I run a series called Vinyl Monday, and this is the first ever Vinyl Weekday Extended Cinematic Universe crossover event.
About a year ago, some of you in the comments recommended that I check out another show on YouTube called Vinyl Monday,
where once a week I give the who, what, when, where, why, and how do I feel about a classic album in my fairly extensive collection now.
I'm so pleased that you did, because not only is that a fantastic show, but also its host is really lovely and we've since kind of become friends. So thank you for the introduction. We thought we'd do a little virtual hangout today, and you are invited to come and hang out with us. I've asked Abby some questions, she's asked me some questions. Let's get stuck in. Okay, here's my question to you, Abby. If your life was a movie, what song would play during the opening credits?
Spirit of Radio by Rush. And here's why. My musical journey started with the radio. Some of my earliest music-related memories are of balancing CD player radios on windowsills to get a signal, or plugging my stations into car radios. Invisible airwaves crackle with life, bright antenna bristle with the energy, emotional feedback on a timeless wavelength, bearing a gift beyond price. Spirit of Radio is a love letter to a now dying industry that I deeply respect. How do you usually discover new music?
Okay, I love this question. Before this year, it was kind of a haphazard process. I had some favorite like online radio stations and that sort of thing that I would listen to, but there were so many to listen to that I was never really listening to any long enough for it to become a part of my life and my soul. I think you really have to spend time with music for it to take on that kind of deeper meaning. So I implemented a new system this year because I am, as you know, a big nerd. And my system goes like this. Every month I get to pick 10 albums to listen to. The first 3 are records from my collection. You know, because sometimes you buy a record and you really intend to get stuck into it and then other albums come along and you forget about it. So, you know, just sort of rekindling a love of my collection. Album 4 is a recommendation that somebody has made to me. Albums 5 and 6 are from those like music aggregators that I mentioned earlier, Tiny Desk concerts, KEXP live concerts, just all sorts of good stuff. 7 is a new release. 8 is from my sort of liked songs, saved songs on Spotify. 9 is a classic album. I have a book called 1001 Albums That You Must Listen to Before You Die, so I'm trying to slowly work my way through that. And album number 10 is something that I can listen to when I go to sleep. Might be ambient, might be like modal jazz, might be classical guitar, and that is how I discover new music. I hope that answers your question. Okay, next question. Can music exist without emotion?
It can exist without emotion, but when music is created without feeling, it's blatantly obvious. It's a hard listen. If you ask me, music is always better when created with feeling and intent. Passion and creativity supersede talent and technicality, always. Speaking of passion, are there any songs that make you cry?
Okay, so the thing is, I'm a sensitive, delicate flower and everything makes me cry, so I had to narrow it down to 3. I hope that's okay. The first is a song that always makes me cry. The song is Across the Universe by the Beatles, and specifically the line that does it for me is "Give me glance and thy love which shines around me like a million suns and calls me on across the evening road." Keep it together. I am a professional. I can do this. There are a lot of songs of my own that make me cry because they obviously draw from personal experience. There's a particular song called Dialects. When the pandemic hit, my sister had the option to come home or to stay where she was, where she had received a full scholarship to go to a fairly prestigious university, and she chose to stay overseas because she didn't want to lose her scholarship. It meant that the pandemic was the longest we had ever gone without seeing each other. And I wrote this song because I just missed her so much. Doesn't really make me cry as much now because I have since seen her, but it was really gut-wrenching writing that one. That line in particular was about how our accents were beginning to change because we'd been apart in different places for so long. This is a hard question. I didn't anticipate this. The last one I chose as a song that most recently made me cry, and that is Help Me by Joni Mitchell, simply because it's divine.
Dance with a lady with a hole in her stocking and feel good.
What a stellar song. I know it's cheating, but I really couldn't narrow it down to one, okay? The next thing I'd like to know is, how has your music taste evolved over the years?
Well, my taste has evolved quite a bit since I started seeking out music for myself at age 11 or 12. That's when I raided my dad's CD cabinet and unearthed all his stuff from the early to mid-90s. But my taste also hasn't changed much. Experiencing Smashing Pumpkins' Siamese Dream at that tender age shaped literally everything else I'd seek out after it in some way, shape, or form. But aside from Siamese Dream, I didn't really listen to albums all the way through yet. Making that habit alone has shaped my taste in a big way. How did I make that habit? When I was 19 and had only just started collecting records, I went in expecting to buy this guy's 150-piece collection off of him, and I ended up walking away with over 300 albums for free. And I'm like, shit, what do I do with all of this? I've never heard of any of this. So I buckled down and listened to one of these new albums every day. That is a new album every day for almost a year. That's how I discovered a lot of my favorite current albums, and this massive influx of new information that was just rattling around in my brain is how Vinyl Monday was born. Yeah, a new album every day was a pretty crazy time in my life. Can you think of a song that perfectly encapsulates a time in your life?
Yes, I can. When I was 16, I fell in love for the first time. Not coincidentally, when I was 16, I experienced my first heartbreak, and it knocked me for 6. I was completely blindsided. I had no idea that it could feel that bad to be alive. Don't worry, I did recover. When I was at absolute rock bottom, my best friend sent me Skylarking by XTC. And when the chorus dropped on that first song, it sounded like hope had been translated into music. Even now, it sounds like hope distilled. When that chorus started playing, I thought for the first time in months that I was gonna be okay. Pretty powerful stuff, this music. What song always puts you in a good mood?
I am so glad you asked. I have a whole playlist of this stuff. Let's go through highlights. First on the list is Love Grows Where My Rosemary Goes.
Love grows where my rosemary goes.
I was a fan of that song long before TikTok. Crimson and Clover by Tommy James and the Shondells.
Crimson and clover.
Absolute classic. Melanie, Brand New Key.
I got a brand new pair of roller skates. You got a brand new key.
The Stones playing Susie Q. VU Sweet Jane, Justice for Loaded.
Sweet Jane, oh.
Hang On Sloopy.
Hang on, Sloopy, Sloopy, hang on.
Louie Louie. Aliana Haynes, Jeremiah, Lakeshore Drive. Shout out to the Forrest Gump soundtrack for that one. And of course, the latest edition, Whiskey Bar.
Well, show me the way to the next whiskey bar.
Oh, moon. What song always puts you in a good mood?
There is not simply one song that puts me in a good mood, and indeed it's difficult to narrow it down to just 3, so I hope this little montage will suffice.
I did it right. I didn't know what I would find there.
Again, I hope that's not cheating. Okay, What are your thoughts on music streaming platforms as opposed to like physical music, CDs, vinyl, etc.?
Given that Vinyl Monday has vinyl in the title, one might assume that I am a staunch physical media purist. In a world where more and more services are rented out, you rent your home, your car, clothes, TV shows, movies, and everything, it's becoming increasingly important to have physical ownership. Because now all that stuff could just be gone at someone else's will. Poof! Especially digital media. If you don't physically preserve that, once it's gone, it's gone. Plus, for an art history nerd like me, there's little more rewarding than seeing the album art as it was intended. Take In the Court of the Crimson King, for example. This incredible illustration was by the late, great Barry Godber. This cover just doesn't have the same power when it's shrunk down to phone screen size. All of this considered, streaming does have its place. It's unfortunate that no one is bigger than streaming, not even King Crimson, Joni Mitchell, or Neil Young. And that streaming services pay their artists scraps, but streaming has broken down so many barriers. I live in a record store desert. Shipping is expensive. I have to make an event of going out and buying records. There's something impossible and beautiful about having an entire music library fit in the palm of your hand. Plus, I have a real life outside of this little square. I have to squeeze in my weekly listening, 1, 2, sometimes 3 albums at once, whenever I can. So Spotify does come in clutch when I can't be with all of this. And yes, Spotify. I can't justify paying Apple Music or Tidal prices for the sound quality when Spotify's music discovery algorithm is bar none. I prioritize expanding my horizons over being Fidelius. But enough of that. What's a song you like that's from a different culture?
I'm not doing very well at this. I've managed to narrow this one down to 4 songs. The first is one that I saw in a documentary about Bela Fleck going through, I believe, Africa and playing banjo in all of these different musical traditions. And it is one of the most joyous things I've ever heard. It sounds like this. The second is some vintage calypso. The third is a little bit tricky because technically it's not a completely different culture because it comes from the Dominican Republic and my mother is Dominican, so I sort of grew up with it, but it's also not the dominant culture where I live. This artist is massive in Latin America and I would imagine virtually unheard of for a lot of Western listeners, but this song comes off of one of my all-time favorite albums, a tour de force, a truly magnificent piece of work, and this is my favorite song on that album. I'd like to know what you think it is about music that touches even the hardest of hearts.
I don't know enough about chord structures or sequences to know what sounds pull emotions out of people, but I do know the human element of music. That's what Vinyl Monday is about, stories and feelings. This might be the hippie in me, but I think people are the coolest, and one of the greatest things that we've done as a civilization is getting together and making cool sounds. Wherever you fall in the timeline, whether you're on the album, you're the person the album is about, or experiencing it all after the fact like me, just being a part of that endless procession which connects all who love the record is deeply moving. Being a non-musician asking these questions to a musician, I would like to know, what's the most musically complex song you enjoy?
This is a really tricky question because music can be complex for different reasons. It could be harmonically complex with strange chords, or it can be rhythmically complex with different time signatures, or it can be lyrically complex. There are a lot of components to music. I guess the easy answer would be something jazz or something prog rock, which I listen to a lot of. but I'm gonna go with progressive bluegrass because everything that mandolin player Chris Thile touches turns to gold. The song's called Familiarity and he plays it with his band, the Punch Brothers.
You explode out of your thoughts, amen.
Okay, next question. How can the silence in a piece of music be just as powerful as the sound?
Within a piece of music, silence grabs the listener's attention, especially if there's a lot of sounds and then none. If we're talking music and silence, John Cage's 433. Music that is silence. But it can't ever be truly silent. There will always be someone shuffling in their chair, a door opening and shutting, a car passes outside, someone sneezes, or their phone goes off. 433 is different every time because you can't ever replicate the environment. Having that unique experience is powerful. If we're talking silence, I also think of the breaks between each side of a record. That can be used to heighten the listening experience. An example I literally do not shut up about: Pink Floyd, Dark Side of the Moon. Putting the side break after Great Gig in the Sky is the best sequencing choice ever made. All of side 1 of Dark Side is modern life, Great Gig is death personified, and then there's a moment of silence for the listener to process everything they've just heard. And then they get up to flip the record and basically change over the journey from the life of one person to the lifespan of society. That break is one of the most profound listening experiences I've ever had. Something else I'm very curious to know as a non-musician. Do you think it's important to learn how to read music?
I think that it is useful. I don't think it's strictly necessary. Some of the greatest musicians in the world have never studied music and can't read music. Paul McCartney can't read music. But there have been a lot of times in my life where I've thought it would actually be really useful for me if I could read music. Because although I took years of piano lessons, I had a good ear and I just sort of cheated my way through them. I pretended that I was reading from the book, but actually I just was playing from memory, which means that I still can't really read music. I can read chord charts, and I can very slowly work out what the notes are in musical notation, but it would be really nice to be able to just take a book of sheet music and sit down and sight read it. Maybe I'll come back to it someday. Why do you think that music is often used as a form of protest or political expression?
I know it's cliche, but I think it's used because firstly, music is a universal language. It gets people moving. Of course, I think of the physical aspect. I'm a known fan of a lot of the most political bands of the 60s, and they made quite the ruckus on stage. Putting physical or intellectual energy into something yields that energy in return, whether it's inspiring other musicians to take a stance or mobilizing an audience to take action. I think of Rage Against the Machine and a few hundred onlookers shutting down the New York Stock Exchange to film a video, or the generations of protest songs that are now, speaking as an American, part of the American songbook. It's in the fabric of our nation now. Music lasts, it immortalizes the moment. Immortality means that hopefully the momentum won't stop. I know that was a lot, but do you have a favorite movie soundtrack or score?
This one is easy. My favorite movie soundtrack of all time is from 1979's movie adaptation of the Broadway musical Hair. The songs are fine in the original, but for the soundtrack they brought in drummer Bernard Purdie and a bassist not credited in the liner notes, but that rhythm section just funkifies the whole soundtrack, and it is amazing playing. I love that soundtrack. When the moon is in the sapphire and Jupiter aligns with the moon. Do you feel like creating music or listening to music can be a spiritual experience?
Yes, in our fast-moving modern world, it's become increasingly important to have an immersive, grounding experience every day. Being forced to slow down by putting a disc on the platter, dropping the needle, listening through, then you have to get up and flip the disc over or switch it out. Engaging with physical media is a meditative activity. If you stream, hearing your music through a speaker in your home, phone, laptop, or tiny ones in your ears. The way that colors your everyday routine can be a spiritual experience. I can't speak to the creating aspect, but I think of A Love Supreme or Santana and the Mahavishnu Orchestra's interpretation, Love, Devotion, Surrender. They used music as expression of belief in a higher power. Humans have an innate need to devote themselves to something, right? Music is absolutely one of those things. If you want to boil down all of the above drabble into one line, yes, because music is the spiritual experience. Are there any songs that you have to dance to when you hear them?
That's an excellent question. There is one song in the entire world that makes me no, of course there isn't. Here's another montage. Again, I sort of feel like I've cheated my way through this entire thing. I hope that's okay, Abby. I know that fashion, especially like vintage fashion, is a big part of your life. How would you say that music has shaped your self-expression?
It's literally everything. It's the reason I present myself the way that I do. If I hadn't come into ownership of a small collection of 60s and 70s rock and roll albums, committed to listening to an album every day, gotten curious as to what these guys looked like, then got curious as to what their wives and girlfriends dressed like, I would never have discovered my love of vintage fashion, which is a pretty big part of Vinyl Monday. I love to dress for a theme. I have one last question for you, Nancy. Since we both evaluate music, I am curious as to what you think makes a great song or album.
Oh, that's a fun one. Incredibly subjective. I think what makes a great album is cohesion. The songs need to sort of work together as a group. You know, like even if a song has some fantastic songs on it, if it doesn't feel like they work together as a group, I don't know that it can be a great album. Innovation is another one. It needs to not sound like other albums. It needs to be a good length. If an album is too long, you just end up missing the songs at the end. Sequencing. As I mentioned in the first Fleetwood Mac episode a couple of weeks ago, the songs have to be in a good order. The album has to flow well. I'm not terribly fussed about audio quality. You know, like Steely Dan sounds fantastic with slick production, but like Kurt Cobain famously hated the cleanness of the recording and production on Nevermind. So sometimes scrappy lo-fi works really well. It just depends on the kind of music. The audio quality has to be right for the album, let's say. And then I think the main one is passion. I think you could have the best songs in the world, but if you're not adequately conveying passion in the music, then it feels cheap. It feels like you're cheating the listener a little bit. So I think passion, if I had to distill it down to one thing, is what makes a great album. This has been so much fun. Thank you, Abby, for your thoughtful answers. You've given me a lot to think about.
Thank you so much for having me on your channel, Nancy. This was a lot of fun and you picked great questions.
And thank you, viewers, for coming and hanging out with us. I'll see you here next time.
Thanks for hanging out with us.
It's time.